Welcome to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I just want to quilt. So today we talked to Tina Hilton of Turtle Hand Batik. We saw Tina at Paducah and other places, but we kind of kept running into her. So at least 3 of our Quilting Army members went to see her because her booth was so cool. And so we talked to her about the batik industry and her social entrepreneurship mission with this business, shipping costs, what it's like to run a business, and her belief in what she's doing at Paducah.
At least 3.
At least 3 of them. They're very enthusiastic.
And they're attracted to my.
They are.
My booth is so unusual. I mean, our look is so unusual. Yeah. Our story is so unusual that I guess they're going, ooh, we need to talk to unusual people.
I know, it's great. I like them. Well, thank you for putting up with 3 of them, which tells me that they really did like your stuff. That's so cool. I'm pretty psyched because I have. Oh goodness, I do have questions. So let me tell you a little bit. You probably know what we are because people kept coming to your booth. So this is a research project. It's a research podcast, which means that I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and you're going to help us understand batiks, and then I may ask you some other questions, and you may want to talk to me about it. And if you do, and you don't want everyone else in the world to know it, then I'll cut it out. So you can say whatever you want to say or not say whatever you want to say. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's not hard-hitting journalists. I'm just trying to understand the quilting industry. And I don't know. I mean, I love batiks, but I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. And I don't know anything about them. So what I want to do is, at least for this call, it's like a half hour to 45 minutes, if you're cool with that, learn all about batiks and your company. And then maybe as we go in, we get more. Right now we're in phase 1, which is just understand a bunch of stuff. And so that's kind of the idea. Does that sound okay to you? Are you there?
Are you there?
Yeah. Are you there? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the first thing we're going to do, what is going on? Why did it?
May I interject something very quickly? You probably had a chance to just preview my website a little bit.
I did.
So you know that.
Hold on just a second. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
You know that the batik that I bring into the U.S. from my artists is from Malaysia.
Yeah.
And that every other piece of batik that arrives in the United States, which is about 10 billion a year or 10 million, I don't know what the number is. I'm sorry, I won't quote anything that's incorrect. But anyway, is all from Indonesia.
Interesting.
So if you're looking to get an overview of the batik business that is prevalent and has been over the past 25 years in the United States, there are other very, very large companies that have been bringing, like Hoffman, HOF, that have been bringing in batiks for 25 years. They pretty much started that. And I'm this little peanut that had decided to share a different kind of batik that was made for only domestic consumption for clothing in Malaysia. So I don't know if that changes.
No, not at all.
Changes
it changes in a good way. I'm totally interested in. So that's so interesting. Okay, so we are preserving these for Quilt Alliance. So we're taking a snapshot of the quilting industry in 2007, 2018. So as part of that, can you, even though I know who you are, can you tell me your name and where you're calling from?
Yes, my name is Tina Hilton. I'm in Grapevine, Texas, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area.
Very cool. And you're Turtle Hand Batik, right? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. So first question we ask everybody is, what's your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life?
my grandmother had a little table in the corner of her bedroom with a little black featherweight. And she would sit in the corner and repair things. She wasn't a seamstress. She used it primarily for repair. And then the most amazing thing happened when the first Barbie dolls came out. She became a Barbie doll costume tailor, and she would make the best little Barbie doll clothes for us.
That's really cool. I love that. My grandmother did too. She made Barbie doll clothes, and I remember that's just like I never saw her making them, but I just saw them arrive. And they were magical. They really, and I don't know how they did it because they were so tiny. It's amazing to me. So tell me how you got into batiks and how you started this company.
Well, I didn't catch the sewing bug from my grandmother. As a matter of fact, I went wildly on the opposite side due to a very evil home ec teacher in 7th grade.
Yeah.
I never had so much agony and humiliation in a class as in home ec.
Oh. That's not cool.
And that wraparound skirt that Mrs. Gruby tried to make me create was a nightmare. So I would not touch a sewing machine. I hated sewing. I was a businesswoman, a career woman. And the thing that turned me around was back in 1997 to 2000, I lived in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, for the first time in Malaysia. And there was a lady who was buying local textiles, local batiks, sarongs, mostly the skirts, and cutting them apart and making quilts. And they were the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen in my life. I love the Malaysian culture. I love the look of the Malaysian clothing. And I vowed that as soon as I get back to the U.S., I would take those 150 pounds worth of Malaysian textiles and learn how to sew quilts. And that's what
amazing.
I did. I moved to California and took 3 years of beginning quilting. And that became my passion for not only quilting, but for Malaysian textiles.
So you're the first one I've ever interviewed. Hold on. This is the first one I've ever that you came in because you fell in love with the fabric. That's really cool, right? So, okay, I just had to say that's such a cool story.
It's absolutely
so tell me,
cool.
So it's absolutely cool that you fall in love.
A few years back, I said to my husband, it's our 20th anniversary coming up. Let's go back to Malaysia for a long vacation.
Uh-huh.
And about 2 weeks later, he came home and he said, guess what, Tina, your dream has come true. Not only can we be there for our 20th anniversary, but we're moving back.
Really?
So in 2012, we moved back to Malaysia and moved back to the east coast of Malaysia, to Kuantan. And the east coast is a hotbed of batik making and many handicrafts.
Interesting.
So that's where it really started.
And then how quickly did you figure that you wanted to do this business? Like, how did this happen? You were buying batiks then from the big, when we started, the big players. They weren't coming from Malaysia. You had some that you had previously when you lived there. But when did this business start? And sort of what was like, take us through the entrepreneurial process of this business.
Absolutely. The first time I was buying batiks, I was just buying them at fabric stores or little craft events and just buying fabric from people who were selling it to make clothing. When I went back, I ended up within the first month at the largest craft event in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. And there were hundreds of vendors of everything from fabric to hand-woven baskets to wood items, just everything, ceramics. And there were many, many fabric purveyors and many, many clothing purveyors. And I would find a piece of fabric on some clothing or folded in yardage. And I would ask the purveyor, oh my gosh, did you make this? 8 times out of 10, they said no. And they had to find out who made the fabric. And so I began a batik detective agency. And I looked all over Malaysia and searched for the people that were making this amazing fabric that I've never seen before. Hand marbleized, hand striped, multicolored, complicated types of batik that I have never seen in quilt shops in the United States.
And where did you find them? Were they all on the East Coast, or were they all over Malaysia?
They were all over Malaysia. So I began my quest of visiting all these individuals that made this fabric and tried to explain to them what I wanted. Parts of the fabric were great. I only wanted one part of the fabric. I wanted it in slightly different colors. I wanted to see what other patterns they had. So we began a journey of finding the top batik makers in Malaysia, the top hand dyers and hand painters. And I found individuals who had a very specific vision of what Malaysian heritage batik was. Some of them stayed very true to the roots, which goes back a couple hundred years, and some were very avant-garde batik makers that turned traditions on their head. So I was very thrilled to work with these individuals, and we began to create a small line of fabric that could be sold to the quilt industry. Through my perspective, I didn't want to appropriate their culture. I just wanted to nudge it a little bit into 21st century American quilters' needs.
And how was how was the response when you started to tell them this?
When I started, pardon me?
When you first started, how did they respond?
Well, they looked at me and they said, well, this is for clothing. And what do you plan to do with it? I said, well, this cotton poplin is perfect for quilting. And they looked, tilted their head and said, well, what is that? And I said, well, we cut the fabric into small pieces like this, and we sew them together in pleasing designs and patterns. And then we layer it and sew it back down together and make bed covers and wall hangings and pieces of art. And they said, you're going to cut this piece into little pieces and sew it back together again?
No.
And I said, yes. And when I began showing them pictures of beautiful quilts that I imagined that their fabric would be perfect, they were astounded. And the smart batik makers understood that this was a way for them to expand their business outside of the rapidly declining domestic market into a new market in the United States with a different purpose.
Yeah.
Now, that didn't change the way they made it.
Right.
All of these artisans create their batik and hand-dyed and hand-painted fabric in home-based workshops. So they're not making bolts of 15 yards. They're making 2-yard pieces and 4-yard pieces maximum because they're at home. They don't have the equipment and the staff to make giant pieces of fabric, nor do they want to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I have a bunch of questions. Let's sort of go back to take a little bit of schooling. So first, what is a batik? Let's start there in case someone. Hopefully, you'll say it's okay to post this for the public. And if someone's out there and they're beginners, tell us what a batik is.
A batik is traditionally a length of fabric that is stamped with a chop. Now, the chop is a handheld, handmade design of a pattern, which is bent sheets, very fine sheets of copper or metal, designed on a frame into a flower or butterfly or an abstract pattern. And this thin stamp, let's call it, is dipped into molten wax, combination of beeswax, paraffin wax, even tree resin is used, and other things to create the perfect medium for a resist, they call it. So when they stamp it on the fabric, this wax now covers the fabric, and whatever color the fabric is underneath, usually it starts with white, that wax is resisting any dye to penetrate the area that the wax is covered. And this is done over and over again in layers. As the colors, the dye is added, they might add another stamp. That wax is a batik discharge for stamping. Now, there's also a little tool that looks like a small roller with a stylus, usually made of copper, which is small, about the size of a tablespoon with a spigot, on a bamboo handle. This has a little reservoir on the top, and you dip that tool into the hot wax, and it comes out very fine on the bottom like a pen or a stylus, and that is used to hand draw the wax resist onto the fabric. So
yeah,
a lot of the batik is either stamped or used with the chunting tool to draw by hand. And the third way that batik can be made is called a crackle batik, where they paint the entire piece of fabric with wax.
Interesting.
It dries, it becomes stiff, and then the artist has his own signature way of breaking the wax to create cracks, and then the dye is painted on top, and it flows into those cracks and creates the design on the fabric.
That's really
and those are the three traditional ways of what is truly batik.
Let me ask you a couple questions about that, because I thought how do they get the wax off? Right? Is there a process to get the wax off once and it seems like
they actually boil it.
They boil it
and when
off?
they have
how interesting.
Usually it's an iron cauldron, big iron cauldron, many times on a wood fire in their workshop, which is a workshop attached to their home. Outside the far end, they'll have a fire going, and they'll have a cast iron cauldron with hot boiling water, and they put sometimes it's troughs. It depends on how big their workshop is. And they put sometimes it's a propane fire, depending on the artist. And they'll put the fabric in after they've worked through the color setting process. They'll put it in, and they have to do that every time they dye. If they dye, they have to, set the color. Then they stamp it again with wax, dye it again, set the color. So all that time, they're processing the dye so that it's permanent. So when they boil the wax off, it floats to the surface along with any fugitive dye. Or any dye that's left on the fabric that wasn't adhered to the fibers. So they can use that wax. They'll skim it off and put it in a container, and they can use that wax maybe 3 to 6 times.
Interesting.
By adding additional fresh wax.
Yeah.
And so there is a recycle portion of the business where they're constantly trying to reuse the wax. And then when it gets to a point where it will not adhere to the fabric properly, then they responsibly dispose of the wax.
And who is doing this? Is it like individuals? Is it women, men, all of the family? Sort of who's creating these products?
There's a very interesting mix of individuals that create batik in some of my hand-dyed and hand-painted fabric. On the far end of the spectrum is Miss Azwa. She is a 30-something-year-old young married woman who is third generation batik maker. Her grandfather was a very famous batik maker whose fabrics were in very high demand for all the elite of Malaysia, including the royalty. His son went on to university and became a professor, and he now teaches batik at one of the local art colleges, passing the craft on, the technical and the artistic and the traditions of Malaysian batik. His daughter caught the bug, and she makes beautiful batik fabric for women's designer dresses and clothing. So,
wow.
Little humble Turtle Hand Batik asked her to make special fabrics for us, and she's makes a very limited amount of fabrics for us, which are beautiful. Now, going on to the other end of the spectrum is Mustaqim. He makes our one-of-a-kind avant-garde art panels. I found him selling these beautiful art panels at art events and at an art event, and he was selling them as sarongs, and they were stunningly beautiful. And for 6 years now, he's been making his art panel sarongs for us and our free motion quilting family, who find them infinitely inspirational for their work.
Very cool.
And then in between, there are families. Mr. Sanusi and his wife, and his son and 2 daughters are involved in the business. And they live in an area on the east coast of Malaysia that is known for batik making. And they are people that make batik part-time. They make batik incidentally. They help other batik makers like Mr. Sanusi. When he has a big order, they'll come in and help him. So Mr. Sanusi and his family have an enterprise, and they have a series of outbuildings that are attached to his house. They're like carports, and he's got 3 or 4 little carport outbuildings, and he creates batik for the local market and happy to create products for American quilters. So it's everything from multi-generational to families to single people like Mustaqim, and everything in between.
And how many do you think that you're buying from? Like, what's your base? How many?
I work with 7 batik makers for the past 6 years, and recently I was in Malaysia, and I'm joining forces with 2 new batik makers. One that does hand painted art panels, and another that makes stamped batik. A young woman named Rose, and her father is a batik maker. So she studied to be an architect at the university, and when she finished school, practiced in an architectural firm and decided that really batik was where her heart was.
Interesting.
It is interesting because in Malaysia is just a little sidebar. Yeah. Malaysia is a very developed country with a very robust economy and society. The people that are making batik in Malaysia are individual artisans. They would be similar to an artisan you would go to a craft or an art show in the US or a craft fair if you were to buy a piece of pottery or a piece of fabric or textile. They're in the similar range. That's how they're making their living. They go to art and craft fairs in Malaysia the same way as the people in America do. So these are high-level artisans that are making their beautiful work, and they're successful. They have homes and cars and and send their children to university. So this is their vocation, their avocation, and their craft. This is not a part-time. This is their work. This is not unskilled laborers. These are people who make.
These are artists.
Make things that are highly artisans. That their work is highly regarded and elevated in Malaysia as individuals, not as companies with workers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And
it's a whole different way of
right. And I wanted to talk to you more about
because
go ahead. I know what.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say this concept of ethical trade practices. I think that connects to it, right? That you're honoring the artistry of the individuals that are creating product for your company. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's the core foundation of Turtle Hand Batik, is that I don't appropriate their culture and Americanize it. I use their ideas, their heritage, and their craft and culture in steering, maybe not steering, curating the collection. So they have designs and they have blocks that they use, and I go through and look at what they already use in their traditional work for their own local customers. I look very carefully at the color sense of that particular artist, and we pick and choose and mix and match within their palette to create a line of fabric for Turtle Hand Batik. I'm not giving them, okay, I want you to make butterflies, and I want my butterflies in fuchsia, orange, and citrus. We go from their color palette and their designs, which makes it's very interesting when you have 7 or 8 batik makers. And it's funny, when you see my complete collection, you would almost think that it's the same company making it or the same art director creating it, because it is so it has a very particular look.
Yeah.
And it's not because of anything that I did, believe me.
That's really
I'm
interesting.
a designer. I just see myself as the curator of the collection, and I help curate what I believe and what I see would be the best combination of their work to present to the United States quilters and worldwide quilters.
Now, do you
Actually.
have, so we've,
So ethical practice.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out.
So that's the first part.
Yeah.
Excuse me. That's the number one tenet of my ethical trade practice. There are probably 3 or 4 that follow closely behind that.
Can you tell us some more? Tell me a little bit more.
Absolutely. Because they are creating a product for the United States, and because they don't have unlimited resources, every time I place an order, I deposit 50% of the total purchase order upfront, so that they have the ability to purchase any supplies that they need and take some income from that. As soon as they finish the order, not shipped, but as soon as they finished it and it's ready to ship, I deposit the remaining balance. They receive all of their money up front, so that Turtle Hand takes 100% of the risk for taking the product and releasing it to the market. So that has been very good for the artisans. A little challenging for Turtle Hand sometimes.
Yeah.
But, they deserve to have that money up front. They don't need to have any liability or for their work.
And how
their work is done. They should.
Right. How big an order? So I'm looking on your Etsy site, and it's so cool. All right. So you've got one-of-a-kind panels, and you've got yardage, which is very reasonably priced, right? Like, it's really amazing. And how big is an order when you're, like, with one individual? Like, if you're ordering, like, the one-of-a-kind, how many of you are ordering at a time? I mean, how big are the orders?
Well, for example, my artist Mustakim, who makes the more avant-garde, abstract-looking work, he is a true artist. He's a young man. He has other people that he's working for and creating for. So I may send him an order for 10 large art panels, 12 runner art panels. So I may send him an order for 35 pieces. It can be various sizes. Uh-huh. Those 35 pieces can take in excess of 8 to 10 weeks, sometimes 12 weeks to finish. Wow. Because of the complexity of the work and how long it needs to be taken on and off the frame. So he puts a 2 meter or 2 yard piece on a tabletop metal frame and stretches it and draws with pencil. The first part of the design, he'll pencil sketch. Then he'll go in with the chunting tool and start creating the resist wax lines. Amazing. With the little tool. Then he'll do some dye painting. He doesn't dip dye. He does everything with the paintbrush. And then he has to let that dry and process that. Then he goes with the second layer of wax or splatter or whatever technique he's using. So that can go on for a couple of weeks because he's an artist. He's building his canvas. And now as far as someone like Mr. Sanusi, who's actually stamping or doing a double stamp discharge, his work is each double stamp discharge piece is about 16 steps. And that also can take 4 to 7 days to create a piece, depending on the weather. And the weather is a big part of it. If it's raining, batik making is not so nice because the humidity will affect the dye, will affect the wax. And one of the most important steps is once the piece is completely finished and processed and washed, it must be put out in the bright, hot sunshine to create that vibrancy of color that that Malaysian batik is known for. So if we have any bad weather, you can't do these processes, and the processes come to a complete stop. So if the weather's perfect in the summer, in the middle of July, it can take 3 to 5 days to make a piece.
Wow.
Which is 4 meters long, 4 yards long. And they're making several pieces at the same time. Right. So one of my orders might be 20, 40, 60, 80, let's say 100 meters of fabric. That would be a typical 100 to 120 yards of fabric. That's a typical order.
Yeah.
And it would take, in good weather, 3 to 7 days, and depending on his schedule. So I usually give him 2 to 4 weeks to complete an order, usually 6 weeks.
That's amazing. Okay, so, and we don't have to air this part, but I'm trying to understand the economics. So I'm looking at like one-of-a-kind art panel square. It's 20 by 20 on your website. It's so pretty. Oh my gosh. I may have to order it when we get off the phone. So it's really cool. And it's $25, right? It's a 20 by 20 panel. Can you help me understand the economics of, because that's very reasonable for a handmade panel. And I imagine there's a lot of different costs involved to get it to Etsy.
Oh boy. Yes. The price that I pay for an art panel is commensurate and probably several percentage points higher than what they're selling their art panels for in the United States. Now, depending on what you're looking at,
in Malaysia, you said United States, so you're paying them more than they would make if they did it at a local craft shop. Is that what? And local craft fair? Okay,
correct. And they don't have the problem of making it and then having to sit on it until it sells. Right. When they get an order from me, they know they're going to get 100% of their money for making it. And that is a very happy thing.
Right.
So depending on which piece you're looking at, I don't know if you're looking at a flower or something abstract.
Yeah, I'm looking at an abstract. It has a butterfly on it, but it's abstract.
Okay. So if you're looking at... there's 2 different people making the art panels. The avant-garde are Mustaqim, who's the 29-year-old art school graduate, who, by the way, his father is a high-level government official, and his mother is a principal of a school, and his sisters are registered nurses. So he comes from a line of professional people. Right. So him making art is always challenging, especially, you can imagine, your cousin's going into art and your aunt is going crazy because how's he going to make a living? Right. But so it's the same.
It's right. It's just, that sounds like a very familiar story.
So yes, it is. So Mustaqim, his small pieces are something that he does not sell in Malaysia. Interesting. Typically, he sells the sarongs, the 2 meter or 2 yard long size. That's his size. And sometimes he'll make scarves, very complicated, gorgeous. I have a few of his pieces that are so beyond imagination you couldn't even. I have art of his hanging on the wall. So what he makes for me is not always what he sells in Malaysia, because people aren't buying little squares of fabric. Yeah. They're buying his silk scarves and his silk hand painted dress material and his cotton sarongs and kaftans. Yeah. So in that case, he's making it just for me. Now, in the case of Z is a woman who makes the flowers, the big flowers. Irises, and the beautiful. She is an artist in Malaysia who has been making things like that for 25 years. And she typically sells her pieces matted and framed. Wow. So,
very cool.
Well, so that's how I found her, is that her work is sold in high-end hotels and tourist places. She sells at art shows and craft shows, and they're framed or at least matted, and then people take them home and frame them. So what she makes for me is not as detailed or as as time consuming as her artwork that she sells for framing, because I could not afford to purchase her artwork as she sells it.
Right.
So what we've agreed is that she takes the same themes and styles, and she does less shading, less watercolor work, less detail. So her pieces are created for, and she understands this, for people who are doing thread painting and embellishments, and creating their work, using her work of art as foundation to express themselves in the textile art world. So you can compare one of those pieces to what she has in the gallery, and you'll see there is a difference, but you will see that her creative stamp is on it. So I have several of her pieces that are of that level, but we have the agreement that in order for American fiber artists to afford her work, she has to create a different version for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does. And that's how we keep the price at $25. If it were one of her pieces that she sold in the hotel or in a craft or art show, it would be triple that or more.
Now, how do you get it from Malaysia to the United States?
Well, let's see. Because we have limited edition, small batch. In the beginning, when I was building my inventory, the first 3 years, I was shipping anywhere from 35 to 25 boxes, and I would send them on a container ship and find a space in a container less than cargo load, and get them to the United States by container. And those containers would take, 4 weeks just to sail from Malaysia to Los Angeles. And then once it hit the dock, we had to find the freight forwarder or the shipping company had to find somebody to take my small load, shrink wrap load out of the container and put it in a warehouse and find a ground transport truck that was going to Dallas and bring it to me.
Wow.
So that could take up to 6 to 7 weeks from shipping to my door.
That's crazy. And I imagine
it's
expensive.
Very expensive.
Yeah, sounds expensive.
Very expensive. And I pay almost a 12% duty on Malaysian batik.
Interesting.
So now, because of time sensitivity and having to fulfill orders quickly, and because my business is growing organically and I run out quicker than normal and need things quicker, I've been sending things by DHL air freight.
Interesting.
I'll get it in 4 days, but the cost is, almost double.
Interesting. So it's
but I don't have to because I can't right now. I can't, since I don't live in Malaysia anymore. I live in Texas. Before I could store, and bundle everything. Yeah. Now it seems like I have to ship it much more frequently.
How much do you think on, I don't even know if this is possible. So how much of the price is shipping then for you on these individual things? Is there a percentage you know?
I did quite a bit of research in the beginning in my business plan, and as I started doing this, to determine how to come up with a break-even cost on everything.
Right.
And that was based on projected shipping costs and actual shipping costs for the first year. And I came up with a formula that is, valid and certified by accountants, that you take a percentage of all your shipping costs and then you determine if you shipped 40 boxes that weighed 1,200 pounds or whatever, and there were 1,800 yards of fabric, you do the math and you figure out how much each yard of fabric, what percentage of that shipping cost you have to apply to each yard of fabric.
Right.
Now you also have to add that almost 12% duty.
Right.
To that.
That's craziness.
Yeah. So, and intershipping, and there's all these other costs that are involved. So I don't know I don't think that this is any big secret to anybody that knows cost accounting, but it ends up being 30%.
Wow. 30% is shipping.
Addition to the cost of a piece of fabric.
Wow. That's amazing.
And then there's all the other costs that there has to be another cost for marketing.
Right.
And then
marketing. So you have an Etsy shop, you go to shows, and do you sell, what other ways do you sell wholesale to shops or?
Yes. Yeah. For the past 6 years, I've been going to all the large quilt shows like Quilt Week in Paducah and International Quilt Festival in Houston and Quilt Con, wherever it is in the country, and Original Sewing and Quilt Expos and Mancuso shows and
that's a lot.
You name it. So I've been going to the big shows and presenting Turtle Hand directly to the consumer. Of course, the Etsy shop is new. Prior to that, people could go to the website and order directly through me. I also have been going to all the quilt markets, the wholesale markets, and twice a year where I set up a booth and talk to the quilt shops all over the country about why Turtle Hand would be a good addition to their offerings. And I also go to guild events, and I do a lecture and a trunk show and a pop-up sale. I also do
That's a lot of work. That's a lot
trunk shows and pop-up sales for quilt shops. So just to give you some perspective.
That is a lot of work. That is so, I'm exhausted just listening to
I'm exhausted. You wouldn't believe it. So just to give you some perspective, if I'm going to the International Quilt Festival in Houston and I rent a double booth, which is 10 by 20, it's almost $2,500 just for the booth.
Okay.
And that's for 3 to 4 days.
Right.
And then I have a helper that I pay that comes with me. And that's almost for 30 to 40 hours of work.
Yeah.
Because I'm a sole proprietor.
Right.
All of this work is done by me.
So much work.
Other than helpers at the show. And I've got a part-time lady in Dallas that helps me.
That's craziness.
All those costs. So my husband jokes and says that when I'm going to quit being a nonprofit business. And my accountant says, you better start showing a profit even if you have to pretend that it's a profit, or the IRS is.
Because it's too much. It looks like a high rate.
We've
got one of those businesses right now, not with quilting, but something else.
So I say, you know what? I'm doing something that is a passion. It's a labor of love. And I see the potential in this business of not only promoting Malaysian heritage crafts, but opening the door for people who are more interested in curating their own collection of fabric, not just accumulating all they can, but carefully thinking about where does this fabric come from, and what is the meaning of this fabric, and how does this affect the work that I'm doing, and what kind of story can I tell about this quilt or this art piece that I made that it resonates with other people? And that's the story we like to tell. Even if somebody buys a $5 fat quarter, they can go and make their piece and say, this fabric came from Malaysia, from Mr. Sanusi and his family. And that gives me the chills just saying that. And
that's really cool.
To see that's what it's all about. So someday if we can grow the business to a sustainable level, we would be really happy. So everyone, please check out turtlehand.com.
Exactly. Quilting Army. And go buy a Turtle Hand Batik. Support ethical trade practices, right?
Absolutely.
So I have some more questions for you. So you also have causes. So you use the term social entrepreneurship, and I'm a social entrepreneurship, like a titled professor. Like I'm a social entrepreneur. We have a social entrepreneurship professorship right now. So I'm curious.
Neat.
Yeah, isn't that cool? So explain what social entrepreneurship is in case someone listening doesn't understand it, and why you've included it on your website.
Well, I think that I'm a little set back because I feel like I'm having a test with the social entrepreneurship.
Sorry about
test,
that. I don't
I'm
mean to do
afraid
that
my
to you.
answer is I'm just going to get a big fat goose egg.
No, you are a social entrepreneur, and it's different, right? It's different than just a straight entrepreneur because you have other reasons you're doing it and not just for profit.
Obviously. Let's get my husband. He's in the other room working right now. Let's get him in.
Exactly.
Yeah, I work for a captain of industry, a titan of international business, and he doesn't want to see my books. No, Tina, that's fine.
Right. That's funny.
We want to keep the marriage. We want to keep the marriage.
Totally get it. I like that.
So social entrepreneurship, yeah. I guess I take it as a Tina Hilton Turtle Hand definition.
Yeah.
Is that in a society where in America and probably many other places in the world that we know, we're all about acquisition.
Yeah.
We're all about consumerism. I mean,
Yeah.
I look around myself, of course, I include myself. And more people that I've been talking to, especially since I started this business, are really thinking carefully about how do I downsize? Because women of a certain age, they get to the point where they say, enough is enough and I have enough and I'm going to let go.
Yeah.
People are downsizing. People are moving out of their McMansions and moving into small houses and sustainable communities where they feel like they don't need all the stuff that they need.
Right.
So what do you keep? And, thinking about downsizing, talking to people about downsizing, what is important to you? Yeah. The things that are important to you are things that have a story, things that give you pleasure. Yeah. You retain the things that are beautiful and are meaningful in your life. And not everything qualifies. So social entrepreneurship is creating a business that provides the opportunity for people to acquire, yes, they will acquire additional beautiful things. Not just how many fat quarters can I get for $10? I mean, we may have all done that in our beginning of our quilting, as we needed to have as much as we could for as cheap as we could. Same thing about clothing. This is a throwaway clothing society. We buy clothing and we throw it away after a season or give it away. Talk to any company like Goodwill or any other thrift organization. They say we can't take all this clothing anymore because even the African countries don't want our clothing anymore.
That's amazing.
So that's one part of it, is how to have beautiful things and surround yourself with beautiful things. And also, where do these things come from?
Yeah.
How can we, people are talking about farm to table. People are supporting their local food growers and food purveyors. Where are we getting our honey from? Let's buy local honey, for example. Right. Where are we getting our tomatoes from? Go to your local farmer's market. Find somebody, who has a little farm stand. And that we're going back to what our parents and some of our parents and all of our grandparents and great-grandparents did. We bought locally. Right. Now, we're not, with Turtle Hand Batik, we're not buying locally, but we're buying from people who are creating a beautiful product in their home-based business with their families and with the help of their neighbors. Very
cool. And I mean, so that's what social entrepreneurship really is, right? That it's more that there's a social good, that like the social part is as important as the entrepreneurship part. And it seems like that just the stories you're telling about the individuals, and that you're respecting their artistry, and that you are paying them a reasonable wage for what they're doing, and and you're not appropriating their culture, like all these things we call social entrepreneurship. You also on your website talk about you lend a hand to you have like 4 organizations that you help with. Tell us a little bit about the causes part of the business.
Oh, Rafa Children's Home is a organization that is in Kuantan on the east coast of Malaysia, who I became very involved with during my 5 years living there. And it typically is non-denominational, but is supported by social organizations like Kiwanis and Rotary Club and that type of group. It's also supported by local churches. And the children come from all walks of life throughout Peninsular Malaysia and East Malaysia. Children that their parents no longer can take care of them for various reasons, and gratefully accept Rafa Children's Home to take their children and care for them and raise them for a temporary period of time, or in some cases permanently. So this home is a small little bungalow, and they usually have about 20 to 25 children ranging from the age of 2 to through college age. They'll support the kids. And we did a lot of fun. I did a lot of fundraising in Malaysia with Rafa. And now that I'm back in the US, I just donate money. And that's a cause that's very near and dear. I'm also very interested in Aboriginal, or as they call Orang Asli, tribes in Malaysia. These are individuals that are original people from Peninsular Malaysia and East Malaysia, and they don't affiliate themselves with any religion or race other than Aboriginal race, and they are very well known for their handicrafts. They do a lot of wood carving of spirit masks. They also do a lot of weaving of forest-based grasses and bamboos, and create the most beautiful products. And I support, and they make jewelry from forest-based products. So what I've done over the years is I've been able to work with different groups who have made products for us that we put in our booth. And I pay them a very good price for the product. Let's say they're hand-woven bracelets out of a pandan grass, hand-woven, hand-dyed. I will pay them for it, and then I will put it in the booth and sell them again. And they're donations. And I say this little woven bracelet is $4, and 100% of that $4 goes back to this Orang Asli group, and I have usually a picture of the ladies that made them. Cool. And then I send that $4 back. So they get paid for the work and the materials and whatever, and then I send them back whatever I collect in the booth. Some people don't take it, they'll just leave a couple dollars. So I usually have a product like that in the booth to support Indigenous crafts.
Love it. And
also, Turtle Conservation Society of Malaysia has been an event and a cause that I always donate to, and can't think of.
All right, so I have a question. Why we're running out of time because we're already at an hour and 52 minutes. Can you believe it? But I have 4 questions, so maybe this is the lightning round. Why Turtle Hand? Why name Turtle Hand?
An advertising agency guy told me I needed to come up with a real spiffy reason. But the simple reason is I'm a slow knitter. And my friend said one day, Tina, you have turtle hands.
I love
and
it.
So I decided that I'd use that for a business name someday.
I love it. Then the other thing that I'm always so with fabric, usually on the selvage, there's a licensing or it tells you who made it. But with batiks, it doesn't. I'm assuming that's because of the way they're made, but I'm curious about how you identify that. Do you care? There's no licensing information on any batiks, right? It's weird. I mean, it's cool,
no.
But there's nothing.
Nothing. If you look at a batik sarong that's sold in Malaysia, the maker has a stamp, and they will stamp their name on it.
Interesting.
Now, I have a few sarongs that I sell, but what I have a chop or a block made with Turtle Hand and my logo. Well, it says Turtle Hand crafted in Malaysia.
Yeah.
It's a lot bigger than what you would see on a commercially printed salvage. And I kind of vacillate, and so do my artists, forget sometimes, but they'll stamp that every 2 yards, or every 2 yards on a piece. But some people complain because it's over an inch high and they have to cut that off. Right. Some people rejoice and fussy cut it out and proudly display it in the quilt somewhere.
I like that.
So
I like it.
I would say that a third of my fabric comes with the stamp, and I vacillate. So yes, I do have a brand, I do have a stamp, but I think it's because you can't make a little stamp small enough to compete with a salvage stamp. The only way you can.
Yeah, and there's not really. I mean, all these batiks. It's so interesting because you buy them and you're like, I don't even know where. Like you look, you're like, where did all this come from, right? Which is
now the only way to combat that is silk screen.
Interesting.
You can make a silk screen small enough, but I thought, well, that's kind of defeating the purpose. I'm not doing silk screen. I'm doing batik.
And also it's kind of nice in some way. It kind of defies the world we live in because it's unruly that you can't so that was my other question is how can you give us a quick, well, I have two more questions. One's on copyright. Do you, these are artistic works. They're one of a kind. Do you have any issues or worries in the intellectual property or copyright field? Do you see people copying your designs? Do you worry about do you have contracts do you hold the copyright in the designs? Sort of what's the role of copyright in your business?
In the Malaysian batik world, if the batik maker owns the stamp, that's his stamp, that's his block. So if I choose a block and then pick and choose from his color combinations, and he makes that for me, I ask him respectfully not to sell it to anyone who's going to sell it in the U.S. Well, we haven't had that problem, but I can go to Malaysia. I was there last month and at a craft event, and I saw some of the fabric that was made for me in clothing for the domestic market. So it's not a turtle hand. I can't appropriate his stamp and call it mine.
Interesting.
What I can do is provide him with an idea board, and I say, I want a bamboo stamp that looks kind of like these things. And then he'll design it and draw it and have it made for me. Now, in that case, I own that block. And he cannot use that for anyone except me. And it's kind of an honor system. Yeah,
and that actually really bodes with how copyright works, right? That one is that so, and do you have contracts with them that say this, or is it how does it work? Yeah. And is it for
I have an agreement.
Yeah. And then how long is it I own the stamp, or I own it and you can't use it, but then you can use it later? Is it?
No. If it's my stamp, I came up with the concept.
Yeah.
I pay the batik artist for his design. So I pay him a design fee because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to make a stamp. And I own it now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the gentleman's agreement, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that it's work for hire, right? They've done it for you what you wanted to do. So that totally makes sense.
And it's in our agreement that says if you create a block for me, that is exclusive for the exclusive use of Turtle Hand Batik.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you so there's all this thing about seasons of fabric. Do you feel like you have to you can only have certain fabric out for a short period of time, or do you feel like there's a collection of material? Do you feel the pressure of new, or not selling things that have been around?
Because my customer base is so minute, and because my line is over 250 different pieces of fabric. Yeah. Not the art panels, but the fabric. Even if somebody has been purchasing from me for 5 years, they can come back and see something that they haven't seen before. That's really cool. To their collection. Oh, I didn't know you had this. Yep. Now, I get new customers every day, or not every day, but I get new customers at every show, and people stumble upon me. So all this is new to them.
Yeah.
So what I
That's the
have
idea.
currently in my inventory is what I started with additions of colors and with additions of patterns.
Yeah.
So now we're coming on 6 years with this turtle hand look.
That's really cool.
I'll give you a little hot tip
Yeah.
for the podcast.
Okay.
My last visit to Malaysia, I'm working on a new addition to the line that will be released this fall.
Oh, cool.
So it's a different kind of look because they're different batik artists. So this will be added to the existing line that I have.
That's
Now,
really cool.
some of the things in my existing line will not be repeated, cannot be repeated. And so when it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
So I do not feel the pressure of seasons. We don't have that pressure because we're creating a specific look and feel. We're not trendsetters. We're not trend followers.
Yeah.
We are what we are.
Interesting. And then you had started this interview with the large companies. How can you, we'll interview them, but how, from your perspective, what are they doing exactly? And just for our listeners, like a short, like how are they different? How do you define yourselves against them, I guess?
I think that we play in the world together very well. You know, the companies, the large companies that have manufacturing of batik in Indonesia are fabulous companies, and they have an outstanding group of products that we all love. So we play well together because we're so different look and feel and story. The large companies have in great part big workshops, not factories, but big buildings with a lot of employees and a lot of machinery that can help them make bolts of fabric. So if you have a purple dragonfly batik, you could probably make 1,000 meters of that, 2,000 meters, because there are over 6,500 quilt shops in America. And if you step into any one of them, I would say 90% of them have Indonesian batik.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of people to make batik for.
Yeah.
So they're making in mass quantity. They have the economy of scale. They have textile manufacturing where they manufacture their own white fabric, which keeps the cost of white fabric very low in Indonesia. In Malaysia, they import fabric from China primarily for their batik. They don't have textile mills.
Interesting.
So that's quite a different thing. And they're making it on the batik is made on an assembly line, and it's beautiful and it's all handmade, but it is mass produced crafts.
Yeah. It's just a different product.
They market their product different ways, where they have the deep pockets to advertise in every magazine.
Yeah.
They have the deep pockets to sponsor things. They attract the top designers in the country to create patterns for them. So whereas Turtle Hand, we advertise on a modest scale. Mm-hmm. We sponsor events on a modest scale. And the people that we choose to do business to design our patterns or use existing patterns are usually grassroots designers.
That's really cool.
They're not the big names that we all read about in the magazine.
Right.
Since we don't advertise in the magazines, tens of thousands of dollars a year, right. We don't get editorial in the magazines, and we don't get our patterns or anything Turtle Hand related. Because what people do is they go to their quilt shop and they say, I saw this beautiful quilt in this magazine and I want to make this. Could you kit it up for me? So
interesting.
It's different. It's a different thing.
It's
really
thing.
Grassroots.
Well, and
it's beautiful. And I think we're in a place for both.
Yeah. I also think we interviewed somebody who takes just a little bit of fancy fabric and then puts a bunch of stuff around it. And it seems like if people like improv quilting where there's like a medallion like in the middle and there's a whole bunch of stuff and there's really beautiful work, and it seems like your stuff really lends itself to that kind of quilting, where if you really want beautiful, unique pieces, that this is the place to go. Because I'm looking at your sample I'm at the pattern samples, and it's just, they're stunning. It just looks different. It looks different than other batiks. You can see sort of the individuality in a way that is really cool. It's really cool. Well,
Thanks, Elizabeth.
This is really cool. Well, I think you're awesome. I like your stuff. I so need to go to your Etsy shop and now buy a bunch of things, which is not good. And it's great. So I would love to chat with you more as we get sort of into this project and sort of what we learn as we go. So we're going to do a whole thing on fabric. So it would be great to come back and chat with you more as we learn more. But this is great. And thank you so much for your time today. Your stuff is great. Your story is so amazing. And I love that you're a social entrepreneur. That's so cool. All right, cool. Well, let's hold on. I'm gonna turn off the recording, but don't hang up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. You've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. We want to hear from you. Join our army, our quilting army. Go to our Facebook page. Suggest people to be interviewed. Suggest yourself to be interviewed. We are excited to hear from you. But most importantly, I hope you get a chance to quilt today.